Hey viewers, this is hifiaudio from Glen Rock, New Jersey. Today we're bringing you something pretty special that is rather rare in the audiophile world. It's a complete cello music system, pretty much the top of the line for cello from the mid-90s. This is a system composed of many amplifiers, many boxes, so I thought I'd make a video to feature how it's configured and how it works, because this is a pretty important system as far as the audiophile world comes. So in the 1990s, Cello Audio, which was owned by Mark Levinson after he left, obviously, the Mark Levinson brand, he formed Cello Audio, and it was one of the few brands that was able to bridge the gap between, pro audio and consumer audio. This equipment would have been found just as much in a recording studio, a record label, as it would be in someone's high-end residence. And that is no easy feat. Very few brands have been able to do that over the years. I can only think of a handful. And I'll go over what this configuration would have been in a resident versus in a studio. So let me go over the components first of all. The speakers are the Stradivari Grandmasters, the largest speaker that they made. These are almost 7 feet tall, tons of drivers that you can see, and they're what we call line array speakers. And line array speakers are what you would find in a concert hall, essentially. That's the best way to describe it. They're meant to be efficient and to be able to project really far into a room without really blowing away any particular seating position. So if you've got a large residence or a large family room, line arrays tend to do really, really well, especially if you want to cover the whole residence or the whole room with just 2 speakers rather than have to put them everywhere. And that is because of the rows of tweeters and mid-ranges you can see. This particular speaker is uniquely designed in that it is essentially 2 speakers in one box. It is divided into 2 completely separate speakers, even though they share one enclosure. So one of the woofers, which is I think a 12-inch woofer, or let's just say one channel, drives the one woofer, 4 mid-ranges, and 4 tweeters. And then a second channel of amplification drives the second woofer and the other 4 mid-ranges and 4 tweeters. And that's what we're running right now. We only have the bottom amplifiers powered up, and we're running essentially half of the speaker. So there are 2 sets of crossovers, incredibly complex overbelt crossovers inside of each one of these cabinets. I got to look at one the other day, and it was like nothing I've ever seen in terms of component count. Again, these are about 7 feet tall. They're finished in the cream lacquer. We've got the grills for them over there, which are pretty transparent as well, but we thought we'd show them without the grills. All right, moving on to the amplification. These are the Performance 2 amplifiers, also by Cello, obviously. There are 200-watt amplifiers at 8 ohms, and then they double at 4 ohms to 400 watts, and then again to 800 watts at 2 ohms. So they're very capable, and there are a lot of boxes, but let me break it down for you. This is essentially the left channel right here, and there are mono blocks. So this is one mono block, and this is the other mono block. So if we look at a single mono block, is the power supply and the driver stage. So these 2 boxes right here are driving half of the speaker, and the other 2 boxes are driving the other half of the speaker. Pretty neat configuration. They can also be bridged into a single larger amplifier, but it seemed like it makes perfect sense to divide it, particularly when using these speakers. And then the speakers in the back have a bazillion connections. They're tri-wire. We actually have 3 pairs of wires to each half of the speaker. I'd just like to show you that in a different video. But it's pretty complex, but it comes with all the cabling that you need to power this thing. So we have the exact same thing on the right side, the 4 chassis, which is essentially 2 monoblocks running the right speaker. All right, moving on to electronics. The bottom piece you see here is the power supply that can power 2 devices. In this case, we're using it to power the audio palette as well as the audio suite preamp. So it's a 30 volt / 24 volt DC power supply that has 2 sets of outputs with a ton of connectors to power these 2 chassis essentially. The top chassis is the famous audio palette, which is essentially an equalizer. Well, actually depends which version you get. There are two versions of this piece. One is just a pure equalizer, and the second version adds some input selection, so it can be used as a preamp. They look identical, but they're pretty different in function. One requires the use of a separate preamp and the other one doesn't. The audio palette was essentially a really high-end equalizer, and a lot of people in the audio world turn their nose up at equalizers, but there's definitely a place for them in a home system, especially if you like to have things exactly the way you like them. This equalizer is fairly subtle in its execution, so it's not like these 50-band graphic equalizers that you would buy at a music store. This is a subtle yet refined equalizer that allows you to dial in your speakers just the way you like them. And that's what the bottom row does precisely. These 6 potentiometers, which I think have something like 70 different positions on them. They're incredibly beautifully built potentiometers. We did an Instagram video recently with showing or displaying what they look like internally. But essentially these are 6 attenuators for frequency between 15 hertz and 25 kilohertz. So your bass starts here, goes into your mid frequencies, and then your high frequencies. And as you turn it, you can attenuate, and it's marked in dBs between 0 and minus 20 dBs for each of the frequencies. The top part is essentially for gain, balance, equalization, and phase control. So you can invert your phase output. So again, the top is all for function selections, and the bottom row is for equalization. Beautiful piece. These sell for a ton of money on their own. They're sought after, and again, come in 2 configurations. The neat thing about this, or one of the neat features of this preamp, is that in a residential setting, you might have found this sitting by the couch. Your custom installer back in the 90s would have run really long cables between your amplifiers and the audio palette, and it would have been placed on a shelf just like this, an acrylic stand. So you'd sit at your couch essentially and have the controls right here to control or actually dial in your equalizer. So this would have been part of the kit available with the Cello system. Moving on to the preamplifier. This is the Audio Suite preamplifier. This was their flagship. There are other preamps in the lineup, but this was the one to have. It is a card-based preamplifier, and they designed it this way to give ultimate flexibility. Since this could have been for both the home or the studio, the needs are quite different for one versus the other. The studio might want a plethora of microphone inputs or head preamps for reel-to-reel recorders, etc., while a residential person might want a phono card or additional analog inputs. Well, that's how you would do this. You'd configure and select the cards according to what you wanted. This particular one is fitted with a P301 card, which is essentially your output card. This controls your volume and this controls your balance. Again, these beautiful stepper potentiometers used throughout that were designed and built just for them. So this is a 2-card chassis. I'm sorry, a 2-unit card, because it fills 2 units within the chassis. These 4 next slots are blanks. That is a B200 input selector. So this is essentially your input selector. And yes, you can select multiple inputs at the same time, which is extremely rare for a preamp, but it is possible. So to select input 1, which is where we have our music connected to, is there. To do a second input, you essentially turn off the first and turn on the second. So you got 5 line level inputs and then some monitor outputs for tape loops. The next card is a P201 digital processor. No, that is not a DAC. That is essentially some sort of card for a CD input. And then finally, the most desirable card in the setup, P101 moving coil phono card. This is super rare, very desirable to have this card. Most people at this level are going to want a turntable, so the P101 moving coil phono card is the one to have. It is internally adjustable, takes up 2 slots, and is an absolute wonder of engineering. I read somewhere that this preamplifiers has in upwards of 6,000 parts between the power supply and the actual preamp. Or was it between the cello palette and the power supply? But anyway, you should have a look inside of these things. It's absolutely stunning in terms of design, construction, layout. Is the closest thing to a fine Swiss watch you're going to find. Moving up the chain, we've got the Cello Music and Film Systems DAC. Cello made two DACs. They made a reference DAC and then this Cello Music and Film System, which is a two-unit digital to analog converter. This is the power supply here, and this is the processor itself. Pretty neat. This is version 8.1. You can run your CD transport into this. You can run your streaming service. You can run just about any digital source into it. And out of it comes the typical connectors that you see on most cello equipment, which is actually not RCAs. They use a 3-pin Fisher miniature XLR connector, because all the stuff that they produce, or at least most of the stuff they produced in the 90s, used a pretty unique connector. The good thing about it is that I think if you bought the system, it actually came with all the wiring that you needed. So we have actually sorted and sourced all the wiring needed to connect this entire system, all the little Fisher connectors, adapters to go to RCA, etc. So we've got facilities for everything. So back in the 1990s, to view or experience a system like this, you would have made an appointment at a cello showroom, which were these incredible showrooms designed and built specifically to feature this equipment. So you would have an appointment. They would confirm it a bunch of times. They'd vet you ahead of time to make sure you could afford something like this. And they would do essentially a curated demo to try to sell you a system of this magnitude, because it was expensive. You know, you could run upwards of $400,000 for a system like this back in the 90s, and that's some serious dollars. So they had an amazing laid out and curated experience to entice people to buy something like this for their home. And they also did their rounds with all the studios in trying to get recording studios and professional audio places to feature their products. And if you go online, there are lots of great literature and pictures of different studios and how they used either the preamps or the equalizers, etc. So that's it, the cello reference system, brought to you by Sci-Fi Audio. Please subscribe to our channel if you like these sort of videos. I am not going to play the system. I'm not a big believer that you're going to get any sense of how good it sounds over an iPhone or a computer. So to do that, you'll have to come to our shop in Glen Rock, New Jersey. Again, visit us at scifiaudio.com and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.